Sit back and really absorb what just happened this week, because it might be the biggest political earthquake we have seen since Trump took office for his second term. A federal judge just blew up Donald Trump's entire revenge operation. I am talking about the criminal cases against James Comey and Letitia James, and she did not just dismiss the charges. She basically said the whole thing was illegal from the start. The prosecutor Trump handpicked to go after his enemies, she was never supposed to have that job in the first place. The indictment she secured, completely invalid from day one. Every single action she took as a prosecutor, unlawful exercises of executive power, according to the judge's own words. And now Congress is absolutely erupting, because this disaster comes right on the heels of Trump getting publicly humiliated on the Epstein files, forced to sign a transparency bill he spent months fighting against because his own party was about to revolt against him in a way we have not seen since he returned to office. Come on, are you kidding me right now? We are watching Trump's grip on Washington slip away in real time, and his allies in Congress do not know whether to defend him or start running for cover before the whole thing comes crashing down on their heads. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. What makes this so absolutely insane? For months, actually for years, going back to his first term, Trump has been promising revenge against the people who investigated him and the critics who stood up to him. He was going to prosecute James Comey, the FBI director he fired back in 2017. He was going to go after Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who sued him and his business empire. He was going to use the Justice Department like a weapon against anyone who ever crossed him or dared to challenge his power, and his supporters absolutely loved it. They wanted blood. They wanted to see James Comey in handcuffs doing a perp walk. They wanted Letitia James sitting in a courtroom as a criminal defendant instead of the prosecutor she has always been. And for a minute there, it actually looked like Trump was going to pull it off. Both of them got indicted in September and October. The revenge tour was actually happening. Trump was finally getting his payback. But now, a federal judge named Cameron McGowan Curry just threw the whole thing in the garbage and said that Trump's handpicked prosecutor Lindsey Halligan was unlawfully serving in that role. The judge wrote that all actions flowing from Halligan's defective appointment, and that is a direct quote from the ruling, constitute unlawful exercises of executive power and must be set aside. This is absolutely wild. And the timing could not possibly be worse for Trump, because this humiliation happens right as he was forced into one of the most embarrassing retreats of his entire presidency on the Epstein files. Think about this for a second. Trump spent months fighting tooth and nail to stop Congress from forcing the release of Jeffrey Epstein documents. He called the whole thing a Democratic hoax designed to distract from his agenda. He attacked Republicans who supported the transparency bill. He even called Marjorie Taylor Greene, his own loyal attack dog who has defended him through everything, a traitor because she would not back down from demanding the files be released. And what happened in the end? The House voted 427-1 to release the files anyway. The Senate passed it unanimously, without a single objection. Trump had to sign the bill because he knew he was going to lose, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. CNN called it a rare moment of weakness for a president who prides himself on never backing down. The writing was on the wall, and Trump completely caved under pressure from his own party. That is not the behavior of a president who has total control over Washington. That is the behavior of someone who is watching his grip on power slip away. And Republicans in Congress, they are absolutely starting to notice what is happening. Some of them are quietly looking for the exits because they can see what is coming in 2026, and the polling right now looks absolutely brutal for their party. Trump's approval rating has hit a second-term low in multiple surveys. The Nate Silver average shows him at just 41.2% approval with 55.9% disapproval, his worst numbers since returning to office. A Fox News poll found that only 41% approve of Trump, while 58% disapprove, which is underwater by 17 points. And yes, you heard that right. Fox News is showing Trump with terrible numbers. Democrats now lead Republicans on the generic congressional ballot by double digits in several recent polls. One Marist survey showed Democrats ahead by a stunning 14 points. The betting markets on Polymarket give Democrats a 70% chance of retaking the House next year. Republican senators are openly saying behind closed doors that if things do not change dramatically, they are heading for a wipeout in the midterms. One anonymous GOP senator told The Hill that morale has never been lower and that Republicans did not win anything anywhere in the recent off-year elections. This is not me saying it or making it up. This is Republicans themselves admitting they are in serious trouble. Let me walk you through exactly what happened with the Comey and Letitia James cases, because the details are even more damaging than the headline suggests. And I think it is important for everyone to understand just how badly Trump and his Justice Department botched this entire revenge operation. Judge Cameron McGowan Curry issued her rulings on Monday, November 24th, and she absolutely did not hold back in her criticism of how these prosecutions were handled. She found that Lindsey Halligan, the interim U.S. attorney who brought both cases before grand juries, was never legally appointed to that position in the first place. The judge determined that the 120-day window for Attorney General Pam Bondi to appoint an interim prosecutor had already expired months earlier, which meant Bondi did not have the authority to install Halligan in September. And because Halligan was the sole prosecutor who presented these cases to the grand jury, the only person in that room making the government's case, the indictments themselves were invalid from the moment they were handed up. The judge wrote that all actions flowing from Halligan's defective appointment constitute unlawful exercises of executive power and must be set aside. Read that language again and let it sink in. Unlawful exercises of executive power. A federal judge appointed by Bill Clinton just declared that Donald Trump's revenge prosecutions against his political enemies were unlawful exercises of power. That is absolutely devastating language from a legal standpoint, and it exposes exactly what critics have been saying all along, that Trump is trying to weaponize the Justice Department to punish people who crossed him rather than pursuing legitimate law enforcement objectives. The cases were not dismissed because Comey and James were innocent or because the charges lacked merit. They were dismissed because the entire apparatus Trump set up to prosecute his enemies was illegal from the start. Now let me explain how we actually got to this point, because this whole saga is a case study in how not to run a prosecution and what happens when you prioritize revenge over competence. Back in January, when Trump returned to office, Attorney General Pam Bondi installed a man named Eric Siebert as the interim U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, which is one of the most important federal prosecutor offices in the country. Federal law says that an interim U.S. attorney appointed by the Attorney General can only serve for 120 days unless they get confirmed by the Senate or the district court judges in that region agree to extend their appointment. That 120-day clock started ticking in January and expired back in May of 2025, but Siebert kept serving in the role because the federal judges in the Eastern District of Virginia unanimously agreed to keep him on beyond that deadline. So far so good, everything was legal and proper up to this point. Here is where things went off the rails. Trump wanted Siebert to bring criminal charges against James Comey and Letitia James. He had been publicly demanding prosecutions of his enemies for months, but Siebert apparently was not moving fast enough for Trump's liking. Career prosecutors in his office reportedly had concerns about the strength of the cases and whether charges were actually warranted. So in September, right after Trump posted on Truth Social demanding that Attorney General Pam Bondi prosecute his enemies immediately, his exact words were, "Justice must be served now," Siebert suddenly resigned under pressure. Multiple reports indicate he was essentially forced out because he would not do what Trump wanted. And within just 48 hours of Trump's social media post demanding action, Bondi installed Lindsey Halligan as the new interim U.S. attorney to replace Siebert. Who exactly is Lindsey Halligan, and why did Trump want her in this job so badly? She was a personal attorney for Trump who worked on his legal defense team during one of the criminal cases brought against him by special counsel Jack Smith. She served as a special assistant at the White House. She was a loyal Trump soldier through and through, and here is the absolutely critical detail that explains everything. She had zero prosecutorial experience, none whatsoever. She had never prosecuted a criminal case in her entire legal career. She had never stood before a grand jury. She had never tried a case in federal court, but Trump wanted her in that job because he knew she would do exactly what he wanted without asking questions or raising concerns about whether the cases were legally sound. And within just days of taking over, Halligan secured an indictment against James Comey on charges of lying to Congress and obstruction of justice. 2 weeks after that, she indicted Letitia James on mortgage fraud charges. Trump finally got his revenge indictments against the people he hated most. The only problem? Halligan did not actually have the legal authority to bring those cases. Judge Curry explained the legal problem in painstaking detail in her ruling. She wrote that when Siebert's original 120-day appointment period expired back in May, the authority to appoint a new interim U.S. attorney shifted away from the Attorney General and over to the federal district court judges in that region. That is what the law says. That means Bondi did not have the power to unilaterally install Halligan in September. Only the judges could do that, and they never approved Halligan's appointment. The judge wrote that accepting the government's interpretation of the law would mean the administration could evade the Senate confirmation process indefinitely by stacking successive 120-day appointments one after another forever. She called the implications of the government's argument extraordinary. She wrote that under their theory, you could send any private citizen off the street, attorney or not, into the grand jury room to secure an indictment, so long as the Attorney General gives approval after the fact. That cannot be the law, Judge Curry concluded, and she is absolutely right about that. But wait, because it actually gets even worse than the appointment problem. In the weeks leading up to the dismissal, a magistrate judge named William Fitzpatrick had already reviewed the grand jury transcript in Comey's case and flagged what he called a disturbing pattern of profound investigative missteps that included possibly showing privileged attorney-client evidence to the grand jury that should have been excluded and potentially giving the grand jury false or misleading instructions about the law. There were also extremely serious questions raised about whether Halligan even showed the final indictment document to the full grand jury before it was handed up, which would be an extraordinary breach of proper procedure. One court filing revealed that Halligan may have made changes to the indictment after the grand jury voted on it without getting their approval for those changes. This was amateur hour from the very beginning. This was a prosecution run by someone who had never prosecuted anything, trying to take down two high-profile targets to satisfy the president's personal vendetta. Former FBI Director James Comey posted a video on Instagram after the ruling came down, and he did not hold back in his reaction. He said this case was a prosecution based on malevolence and incompetence, and it is a reflection of what the Department of Justice has become under Donald Trump. He said a message has to be sent that the President of the United States cannot use the Department of Justice to target his political enemies. He added that he knows Trump will probably come after him again, but his attitude will remain the same. He is innocent, he is not afraid, and he believes in an independent federal judiciary. Letitia James released her own statement saying she remains fearless in the face of these baseless charges and will continue fighting for New Yorkers every single day. Her attorney, Abbe Lowell, was even more direct. He said the president went to extreme measures to substitute one of his allies to bring these baseless charges after career prosecutors refused to do so. He called it proof that this case was never about justice or the law. It was about targeting Attorney General James for what she stood for and who she challenged. Now here is where Congress comes into the picture, because this ruling lands at the absolute worst possible time for Republicans who are already reeling from the Epstein files debacle that just played out over the past few weeks. Let me give you the full picture of what happened with the Epstein fight, because it shows exactly how much Trump's iron grip on his party has weakened since he returned to office. For months, Trump fought aggressively to prevent the release of Justice Department files related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. He called the transparency push a Democratic hoax designed to embarrass him. He attacked members of his own party who supported the bill demanding the files be released. He personally contacted Republican lawmakers to pressure them into opposing the measure. He accused Republicans who supported transparency of being manipulated by the left. And in one of the most shocking moments, he revoked his endorsement of Marjorie Taylor Greene, arguably his most loyal defender in Congress, and called her a traitor because she refused to remove her name from the discharge petition, forcing a floor vote on the Epstein bill. But none of Trump's pressure tactics worked. Republican support for the transparency bill kept growing week after week. By mid-November, 218 members of the House, including dozens of Republicans, had signed the discharge petition, which meant the vote was going to happen, whether Speaker Mike Johnson or the White House wanted it or not. Trump's allies tried everything to stop the momentum. They pressured individual Republicans to back off. They floated the idea of launching a new DOJ investigation into Epstein's Democratic connections as a way to delay releasing documents. They argued that publicizing the files would harm victims and violate privacy. None of it made any difference. The momentum was completely unstoppable at that point. Let me break down why this particular moment is fundamentally different from all the other bad weeks Trump has had since taking office, because I genuinely believe we are watching something historically significant unfold right now. This is not just about one federal judge dismissing two criminal cases on a technicality. This is about the fundamental structure of Trump's second term starting to crack under the weight of his own incompetence and overreach. He came into office with a crystal clear plan: reward his friends, punish his enemies, and bend every single institution in Washington to his personal will. The revenge prosecutions against Comey and Letitia James were supposed to be the centerpiece of that entire strategy. They were supposed to demonstrate that Trump's critics would pay a serious price for opposing him. They were supposed to send a chilling message to anyone who might consider challenging him in the future: cross the president and you will end up as a criminal defendant. And instead of accomplishing any of that, these prosecutions have turned into a humiliating example of how Trump's overwhelming thirst for vengeance leads to incompetent execution and spectacular legal disaster. Look at the polling on this issue, because the American people can see exactly what is happening and they do not like it one bit. A Marquette University Law School poll conducted recently asked voters directly whether the prosecutions of Trump's political enemies were justified. The result was stunning. Americans said by a 16-point margin, 58% to 42%, that the cases against Comey and Letitia James were not justified. They see these prosecutions for what they are: political revenge dressed up in legal clothing. And here's what makes that finding even more significant. The exact same poll asked voters about the criminal indictments that were brought against Trump himself during the Biden administration. Voters said by a 10-point margin that those indictments against Trump were justified. So the American public is clearly not reflexively anti-prosecution or opposed to holding powerful people accountable. They can distinguish between legitimate criminal cases built on evidence and political revenge operations designed to punish the president's personal enemies. And they have overwhelmingly concluded that what Trump is doing falls into the revenge category. That is a massive political problem for Republicans heading into the 2026 midterm elections because they are now inextricably tied to a president whose signature initiative is seen as fundamentally unjust by a solid majority of the American people. And the warning signs for 2026 just keep piling up higher and higher with every new poll that comes out. Trump's overall approval rating has sunk to 41.2% in the Nate Silver polling average, his absolute lowest point of the second term and still falling. The Reuters Ipsos poll has him even lower at just 38% approval, which is catastrophic territory for a sitting president. A Fox News survey released last week found that 76% of American voters view the economy negatively right now, which is actually worse than how they felt at the end of the Biden administration. Let that sink in. Voters think the economy is worse now under Trump than it was under Biden. Large majorities say their costs for groceries, utilities, healthcare, and housing have all gone up this year. And here is the real killer for Trump. Voters are blaming him personally for these problems. The Fox poll found that nearly twice as many voters say Trump is responsible for current economic conditions compared to those who blame Biden. And 3 times as many people say Trump's economic policies have actively hurt them compared to those who say his policies have helped. That is a complete reversal from his first term when voters consistently gave him credit on the economy, even when they disapproved of him personally. One particularly striking finding from recent polling is that Trump's support among his own base is starting to erode in measurable ways. An Emerson College poll found that Republican voters' approval of Trump has dropped 12 points since his inauguration, from 91% down to 79%. His disapproval among independent voters has intensified significantly, rising from 44% to 51%. Among Hispanic voters, his disapproval has jumped from 39% all the way up to 54%. These are the exact groups Trump improved with in the 2024 election compared to his first run. They are the reason he won, and now they are abandoning him. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, a Republican who is retiring rather than face voters again, said plainly that if the party is still in this position by the second quarter of 2026, they are in for a really rough time in November. He specifically warned that if Republicans mess with healthcare and do not get cost policies right, they are going to face major headwinds with voters who are already frustrated about prices. The Epstein Files disaster only compounds these problems because it exposed divisions within the MAGA coalition that Trump has worked extremely hard to paper over and keep hidden from public view. His base wanted those files released. They have been demanding transparency about Epstein for years. They were genuinely furious when Trump started fighting against the transparency bill that would force the documents into the open. Some of his most loyal supporters turned on him publicly over this issue, and Trump responded to that criticism by lashing out at the very people who put him in office, calling the Epstein focus a scam and accusing his past supporters of being conned by the radical left lunatics. That is not how you hold a political coalition together through difficult times. That is how you fracture one beyond repair. Republican strategist Alex Conant told CNN that the Epstein storyline is going to continue to dog the president well into the second year of his presidency. He said the Epstein conspiracies have reached moon landing status, meaning they are now so deeply embedded in the political conversation that they are never going away, no matter what Trump does or says about it. Republicans in Congress are now desperately trying to figure out how to position themselves for the storm that everyone can see coming on the horizon. The fundamental problem they face is that Trump has demanded total and complete loyalty from every single Republican in Washington. Anyone who criticizes him publicly gets attacked viciously on social media and threatened with a primary challenge. Anyone who breaks with him on any issue gets labeled a traitor and a rhino. But anyone who supports him too closely and too vocally risks getting dragged down with him if his approval numbers keep falling through the floor. It is a no-win situation for a lot of these members who are trying to survive politically. Veteran Republican pollster Whit Ayers explained the bind perfectly when he told CNN that Donald Trump has so thoroughly dominated American politics for the last decade, and he has been so demanding of complete loyalty from anyone running as a Republican, that views of the Republican Party and Republican candidates are now completely synonymous with views about Donald Trump himself. That means if Trump is unpopular, then Republicans are automatically unpopular. There is no escape hatch and no way to create distance from him. Republican candidates cannot run away from Trump even if they wanted to, because voters see them as one and the same. And here's the thing that should absolutely terrify Republicans the most about what comes next. Donald Trump is not going to change his approach. He is not going to suddenly become more disciplined or strategic. He is not going to moderate his revenge instincts or start listening to advisors who tell him to calm down. The very next day, after the Comey and Letitia James cases were dismissed, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced at a press conference that the Justice Department would immediately appeal the ruling and continue pursuing both defendants through every legal avenue available. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt went on Fox News and insisted that Lindsey Halligan was legally appointed despite what the judge ruled, and suggested that maybe James Comey should pump the brakes on his victory lap because this is not over yet. They are doubling down. They are going to find another way to prosecute Trump's enemies, even after a federal judge declared the entire effort was unlawful from the start. That is the pattern with this administration, and it has been consistent since day one of the second term. Every setback leads to escalation rather than reflection. Every legal loss leads to furious attacks on the judges rather than acceptance of the outcome. Every embarrassing defeat gets reframed as a victory or blamed on enemies and traitors, and voters are watching all of it unfold. They are seeing a president who promised strength and dominance, but who keeps losing in court and getting humiliated by his own party. They are seeing a Justice Department that cannot even properly appoint prosecutors to carry out the boss's revenge fantasies. They are seeing Republican members of Congress who are terrified of 2026 and do not know what to do about it. The revenge prosecutions were supposed to demonstrate Trump's power over the system. Instead, they demonstrated his weakness and his inability to hire competent people who can actually execute his plans without stepping on legal landmines. The Epstein fight was supposed to end with Trump victorious over his critics. Instead, it ended with him caving completely to bipartisan pressure and signing a bill he absolutely hated while pretending it was his idea all along. These are not the actions of a president who has Washington under his thumb. These are the actions of a president who is starting to lose control of the situation. And if the polls are any indication, the American people are starting to notice. Do not forget to like and subscribe if you want to stay on top of everything happening in Washington. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really going on with Trump and the Republican Party right now, and I will see you in the next one.